Here we're on confirmation, and we finished the third commandment last week. What was the third commandment? Y'all remember? Emma? Yeah, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And we did a little study through, kind of a real small study through what some of the parts of the service mean, and that we do divine service. It's God's service to us, and basically it's a place we go to receive the good gifts of God, and then we respond to them with songs of praise, etc. And we say back to Him what He said to us. Now, if you go in your catechism, everybody has a catechism here today, and but you all didn't bring your Bibles today. Yeah. Oh, somebody did. One person brought their Bible. Do you bring a Bible? Okay, you better, Emma. You're the pastor's granddaughter. So we were going to look through the Bible here, but let's go ahead and turn to I just went too many pages here. If we go down to the end of the third commandment, page 71, we should gladly hear it, learn it, and meditate on it. We have some things after that. Question 41. And it's an interesting question here. It says, what do the first three commandments show us about ourselves? What do the first three commandments show us about ourselves? First, let me ask this. What is significant about the first three commandments? And how do we sum them up from the Holy Scriptures? First three commandments deal with our relationship with God, right? And how do we sum those first three commandments up from Matthew? It's a Bible verse. Yes.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind.
Right. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. And two verses later, we have the summary of commandments 4 through 10, which is, love your neighbor as yourself. And the summary of all the commandments is, right, just simply love. So go to page 72, and it asks the questions, what do the first three commandments show us about ourselves? That we have sinned and deserve God's condemnation, and that takes us to Romans 3:22 and 23. There is no difference, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. If we look at the first commandment, how can we tell we sin? Because oftentimes, who do we make God instead of God Himself? Yeah, Emma's going like this. We make ourselves God. Whenever you break any of these commandments, you're breaking the first commandment. Because who has given us these commandments? God. And then when you decide it's not good enough for you and you're going to break it, you're putting yourself in authority over God. Thus, you are making yourself, fill in the blank, everybody? God, yeah. So the second commandment, not using God's name in vain. And who was it? Was it you, Chris, that brought up a lot of thoughts on that one? Especially the idea of OMG. You see that written all over the place, just haphazardly without thought. Using God's name sacredly, honoring Him, respecting Him. And then, of course, the one we're talking about, the third commandment, which is the commandment to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And the important part of that is to remember that we don't despise God's word, but gladly hear and learn it. Okay? Now, what's the trouble with that, gladly hearing and learn it? Because some people, well, I can tell you this as a pastor, people respond differently to your preaching. And like the story I told in the sermon, was it last week? Or the week before? The week before, I talked about Pastor Lewis and the man that he met. And that man said, was from another church, but he visited all the churches. And he said, "You Lutherans talk too much about Jesus." He says, I go to the most prominent church and fastest growing church in this town, and they don't talk about Jesus as much as you guys do. I watch the TV shows, the most prominent and fastest growing TV show on TV, and they don't talk about Jesus as much as you do. I read all the latest Christian books, and guess what? They don't talk about Jesus as much as you do. What is the center and focus of worship is what God gives us, and who does he give us the good gifts through? Right, Jesus. Jesus Christ. So sometimes we may be looking for things that in what we're receiving and studying God's Word or in a sermon that are wrong. My job as a pastor when I do a sermon is what? To show you your sin, and specifically as we look at different texts each week, I've been just looking at the text that has to deal with the 10 virgins with their oil lamps. Okay. My job when I look at that is to figure out what is the sin problem here, and what is the gospel solution, and how does that sin problem relate to all of us, including myself. And then we identify that sin problem, and then we identify the forgiveness, the specific gospel that comes through that sin problem, and we go from there. So this brings us to question 42. Who alone has kept the law of God perfectly? Emma. Right, Jesus. And he does that on purpose. Okay. We have a name for it. I think I described it in my sermon. Was it Sunday or last? Was it this Sunday? Yeah. God keeping the law perfectly is a certain kind of obedience. Anybody know what we call that? It's called active obedience. You better write that down in a note. Write it in your notes. Active obedience, because this is going to be part of what you need to know. The active obedience of Christ. You got something to write with? Write it down in your notes. You don't have anything to write with? If you go in this room here, there's a box of pencils in there. Or Mr. Drake will get it for you. So write down this active obedience of Christ is Jesus keeping the law of God perfectly. What Bible verses come with that? Can any one of you prove me guilty of sin? Jesus asked that in John 8:46. Hebrews 4:15. We do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness. We have one who has been tempted in every way, just as you were, yet without sin. We identified a place that he did that at. Where did Jesus receive the biggest temptation at? It was right after his baptism. Where did he go?
The desert.
Right, he went into the desert, and for 40 days and 40 nights, he was tempted in each and every way, and yet without sin. How does Christ's perfect keeping the law benefit us? And this is the active obedience of Christ again we're talking about in 43. What is the active obedience of Christ? You should have wrote it down. Yes.
Active obedience of Christ is Jesus keeping the law of God.
Right. The active obedience of Christ is Jesus keeping the law of God perfectly. Now we're going to have a passive obedience of Christ that we'll talk about too. So question 43, how does Christ's perfect keeping of the law benefit us? Since Christ was our substitute before God, our Savior's perfect keeping of the law was part of his saving work for us, and because of him we are considered righteous before God. We call that vicarious. This act of obedience is vicarious, which means it's He does it in place of you. When I was a intern as a pastor, they called me a vicar. And everything I did was on behalf of the pastor. I vicariously did it for him. We have that same idea here. Christ keeps the law perfectly for you. Why does he have to do that? Why does Christ have to keep the law perfectly for you? Who in here is perfect? Nobody? Could that be the answer? Yeah. We sin all the time. So Jesus here, as part of his saving work for us, lives in a way we can't live by keeping the law perfectly in our place. And guess what that does for you? It makes you righteous before God. It makes you look like you didn't sin. Galatians 4 and 5. When the time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law. In other words, he had to keep the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive the full rights of sons. How did he redeem us? Well, through his active and passive obedience. Specifically here, he actively kept the law of God perfectly for us. He does it for us, on behalf of us. He is our vicar. Besides showing us our sin, what else does the law do for us? So we're talking about functions of the law. The law shows us our sin, which is like a mirror. What happens when you look in the mirror? You see everything that's not quite right. You guys are probably in the age of getting zits. Is that true? Are you zit getters? Yeah. And you could wake up in the morning, it's time to go to school, and like, who could we pick on here? Like Chris, he might have a crush on this girl at school, and his zit comes out just above his mask line right there, and he looks in the mirror in the morning and it's right there. So it shows you your blemish. The law does the same thing. It shows us our sinfulness. So we look at the law of God, and that's part of what I told you that I do on Sunday mornings. We look at the Bible verse we're looking at, see what the specific sin is. I take the mirror of the law and I show you what the specific sin is. And then if you see that sin in your lives, you recognize it, and the mirror functions as a law. How else does the law function? It shows us our sin, but what else does it do? Any other ideas? Emma? Well, that's the act of obedience of Christ. We're talking about functions of the law. There's three functions of the law. The one we're talking about right now is the second one. The mirror, as a mirror, it shows you your sin. So it's a curb, it's a mirror, it's a guide. So how is the law a curb?
It keeps you like in line.
Right. It keeps basic order in the world. A curb is there to keep your car from going off the road. If you see these curbs like they have when you go down on the crosstown by IKEA where everything turns like, and they have a little angle on them, the edge of the road. So if your tire hits there, it throws you back into the road. That's how the law as a curb works. It keeps you in line. It keeps general order in the world. Okay? Sometimes we see that order disrupted in some of the riots and stuff. We've seen people looting, thinking that because something went wrong that they have the right to take other people's stuff. Well, it works as a curb, curbs behavior. And then how about as a guide? How is the law a guide for us? What does this guy do? Yes. It kind of shows you where to go. So if you recognize your sinfulness and you want to do differently, what do you look at to do differently? Emma? What's that? Right, the commandments. So they tell you how to act differently, and we see that in all the commandments so far. It tells you what you're not to do, but it also tells you what you're expected to do. Now remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. We are to gladly hear and learn it. So that's guiding us in proper behavior there. All right, in the Ten Commandments, God shows us what His will is. Christians, by the power of the Holy Spirit, are eager to do God's will. 1 Thessalonians 4:3 is, it is God's will that you should be sanctified, which means to be made holy. So now here we come to the other Bible verse. We already seen Matthew 22:37. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, with all your mind. This is verse 39. What is the summary of commandments 4 through 10, the second table? We just answered a little while ago. Emma? Right. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's Matthew 22:39. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind is verse 37 of chapter 22. So the next question is, who is our neighbor? And that question was asked, by the Pharisees. Who is my neighbor? And what is the answer to that? All people are our neighbors. Okay? Everyone is your neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. Galatians 6:10, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially those of believers. Matthew 5:44, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. So love your neighbor as yourself inverts your sinful nature. Who does your sinful nature want to serve? Emma, do it again. You did it earlier. Who does your sinful nature want to serve? It wants to serve yourself. So what does Jesus do? He inverts that sinful tendency and says, you're good at this? Love your neighbor like that now. Take care of your neighbor as you would take care of yourself. And we're pretty good at taking care of ourselves, aren't we? Yeah, we are. So, love your neighbor as yourself. Matthew 22:39. So our neighbor is everyone. How should we love our neighbor? 47. We should love our neighbor as ourselves. Show how his love is loved by keeping the commandments of the second table. So the commandments of the second table are 4 through 10. We're going to look at 4 pretty soon here. Matthew 7:12. And everything do to others that you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. Okay. So it's a message that has gone out throughout. Now, let's turn to the fourth commandment on page 74. And let's take a look at that. And Chris, you want to read the fourth commandment and its meaning for us on page 74? Nice and loud.
Honor your father and your mother. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not despise or anger our parents and other authorities, but honor them, serve and obey them, love and cherish them.
Okay. So we see here, let me ask you this question. If it says honor your mother and father, then you look at the meaning, it says our parents and other authorities. Why does it spread to other authorities when it says honor your father and mother? Any ideas? Let's do this. Fourth commandment responsibility is for your parents to take care of you. Okay. Other authorities sometimes have fourth commandment responsibilities. So, who rides a bus here? Anybody ride a bus? Emily, you ride a bus? You ride a bus? Okay. So, when your mom takes you down to the bus or your dad, and they hold your hand and they put you on the bus, does that happen, Emma? They don't hold your hand and take you to the bus? You walk down there by yourself? Don't they care about you? Yeah. When they allow you to be escorted to school by a bus, who is in authority over you when you get on the bus? Hmm? Right, the bus driver. The bus driver is an authority. They are taking the authority of mom and dad, and it's being transferred to them. Then you get off the bus and you go to school, and you go into your classroom. Who then has the fourth commandment authority? Yes, your teacher, right? And it goes on and on and on like that. Okay, so we see those and other authorities, your parents and other authorities, really coincides with what's really happening. That authority that your parents have, they sometimes give to others through babysitters, through grandparents, all kinds of different things are people that we see. Other authorities also include policemen. Okay, and there we get into what we call the kingdom of the right and the left. We'll talk to you about sometime. The kingdom of the right is God's authority over everyone. The kingdom of the left is the government's authority over us. And we're exercising, today is voting day. So we're voting to see who's going to have authority over us and who's going to take care of us and who's going to make sure that they are good government and do what they should do and keep good order. All right. So we are not to despise or anger our parents and other authorities. Now, Mr. Drake brought something up just a little while ago, and he brought up that he thought that one of the first three commandments had a promise with it, but was he right? Everybody shake their heads like this. No, he was wrong. This is the commandment that comes with a promise. And you see the promise there in the Bible verses coming up. Look at Proverbs 23:22, Bible verse 140. Listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old. That's not the one I'm looking for. Where is it? Honor your mother and father, and you will live a long life. Now, does that mean if you perfectly honor your mother and father, you live 102? It's sort of a general rule. If you listen to your mother and father who know more about life than you do, the guidance they give you will protect you and keep you and allow you to have a longer life. So, let's look at question 48 now. Who are parents and other authorities? Parents are fathers, mothers, guardians, other authorities are all those whom God has placed over us at home, in government, at school, at the place where we work, in the church. We have in the catechism a place called the Table of Duties. And it's in the front. Turn to page 35. Keep your finger where we're at on the commandments. This is called the Table of Duties. Now, what the Table of Duties is the writers of the Catechism have taken Bible verses that talk about those who are in authority and those who are under their authority, and they put together these tables of duties. So look at page 35. To bishops, pastors, and preachers. So the first one here is for pastors. The overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own family well, see his children obey him with proper respect. 1 Timothy 3:2-4. He must not be a recent convert, or he may become conceited and fall into the same judgment as the devil. 1 Timothy 3:6. He must hold firmly to the trustworthy message that has been taught, so that they can encourage others by sound doctrine and refute those who oppose it. People don't like that. They don't like to be told that something they believe is wrong. But notice the second part of this section on the Table of Duties. What hearers owe their pastors. So that was what pastors owe their hearers. They are to teach right, take care of the family. What hearers owe their pastors. The Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel. 1 Corinthians 9:14. You guys take care of me through your parents' offerings and stuff to make sure while I'm doing the church's work, I'm paid for it. Anyone who receives instruction in the word must share all good things with his instructor. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. And that especially happened this past month, because October was Pastor Appreciation Month, and I got nice cards and gifts, and it reminds me of the sections. The elders who direct the affairs of the church well are worthy of double honor, especially those who work in preaching and teaching. And when they talk about elders, they're not talking about what we have here as elders. Carrie is an elder. Okay, they assist the pastors. Elders technically means pastors when you read about it in the Bible. We really have a misnomer. We should probably call our elders deacons, or some call them subdeacons. Especially those who work in preaching and teaching, for the scripture says, do not muzzle the ox while it's treading out the grain, and the worker deserves its wages. And then 1 Thessalonians 5:12-13, we ask you, brothers, to respect those who work hard among you, who are over you in the Lord, and admonish you. Hold them in the highest regard and love because of their work. Live in peace with each other. Then look at the next section, civil government. This is what I was talking about, the kingdom of life. You have there what the government owes you. And it talks there about the sword. And you shouldn't have to fear the government if you do what's right. Okay? Do you want to be free from the fear of one in authority? Then do what is right, and he will commend you, for he is God's servant to do you good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. He is God's servant, an agent of wrath to bring punishment to the wrongdoer. Romans 13, and that's 1-4. Then it has citizens. What citizens owe their government. We had this one in a sermon I preached a few weeks ago. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. Matthew 22:21. And Romans 13 says it is necessary to submit to the authorities not only because of possible punishment, but because of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give everyone what you owe him. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. And all kinds of other Bible verses. And then let's look at the other categories that are there. Husbands and wives. Okay. How husbands are to treat their wives, how wives are to treat their husbands. Parents and children. Okay. And here's where we see the promise, I believe. Yes. Ephesians 6:4. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. That means to make them angry. Do the parents ever make you angry? Could you share that in detail with us right now? No. Is that because your dad's in the room? Okay. So do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Ephesians 6:4. Then children. Here's where this is the one with the promise. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with the promise that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy a long life on the earth. There it is right there. Then you have workers of all kinds, and then employers and supervisors. Then you have youth, you have widows, and everyone. Commandments are summed up in this one rule: love your neighbor as yourself. So everyone. So that's called the table of duties, and there we see that relationship of those and other authorities. Those who are other authorities beside your parents. Okay. Let's look at section 49. What does God forbid in the fourth commandment? Remember, we have forbid and require. And I always wish they would change that. Require is kind of what you get to do. What does God forbid in the fourth commandment? To despise our parents and other authorities by not respecting them or angering them by our disobedience or by any other kind of sin. Proverbs 23:22. Listen to your father who gave you life. Do not despise your mother when she is old. Romans 13:2. He who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. That's a pretty strong one. God has instituted your parents to be your parents. And when you despise them, again, it goes back to what we said before. Anytime you break a commandment, you're breaking which commandment? First one, yeah, because you're making yourself having more authority than God. What does God require of us in the fourth commandment? Now, this is kind of what you get to do. And God requires us to honor our parents and other authorities by regarding them as God's representatives. God takes care of you through other people that He's provided for you. Probably never thought of it that way. God takes care of you through the policeman that keeps the road safe. God takes care of you through your bus driver that hopefully drives safe. God takes care of you through your teachers. And we can make a long list of all kinds of other people. He has provided them there to be there for you. So honor our parents and authorities by regarding them as God's representatives. Ephesians 6:2-3. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment, with a promise that it may go well with you, and that you may enjoy long life on earth. And B, to serve our parents and other authorities by gladly providing what they need or require. If a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn first of all to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. Romans 13:7. Give everyone what you owe him. If you owe taxes, pay taxes, revenue, respect, and respect, honor than honor. So we provide what they need or require. You know what I always like? I have a child, and that doesn't do much. And it's probably more spoiled than all my other children. But if there's something that is out of place, or the garbage is full, and I have to admit, I'm not really good when I see the garbage full, she'll go ahead and take that garbage and take it outside without being asked. And I think that fulfills this one, is serving our parents and other authorities by keeping your room clean. Anybody ever get their rooms dirty? Yeah. I haven't been upstairs in years, but my kids were never very good at keeping their rooms clean, but it didn't bother me because I've never seen them. So all those kinds of things, serve your parents by helping them and helping taking care of the household. C, to obey our parents and authorities in everything which God has placed them over us. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Colossians 3:20. Titus 3:1. Remind the people to be subject to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready to do whatever is good. Acts 5:29. We must obey God rather than men. Now, that's an interesting one. Sometimes we might see that there's a problem with something the government does, and so we can speak out against it. I was watching some statistics before I came in, and a very disappointing one that has gone up over the years is 61% of people think we should keep the abortion laws the way they are. And most abortions are choices that are made that unfortunately don't consider the child. Okay? So those kinds of things sometimes need to be spoken out and against. And if you see your government doing something that's against you, that's a time where things can change and we don't obey them. Now, for us, it might be little minor things, but did anybody ever hear of ISIS? Remember ISIS? The president had to go and fight ISIS at the beginning of his first term. And what went on? They were going out, and one of the people, actually there were two in ISIS that wanted to be caliphs. You know what a caliph is? It was all outlawed in 1914 by the government of Turkey. If you wanted to take Muhammad's place, you know who Muhammad is. the founder of Islam. If you wanted to take his place, you would have to be a caliph. To be a caliph, you have to mimic Muhammad's life. Well, do you know how Muhammad first got people to become part of Islam? Anybody know? He would put a sword, have his people put a sword to your throat, and he would say, convert or die. Convert to Islam or die. And then if you didn't convert, you know what would happen? You know what ISIS did? 2 people that were a part of ISIS wanted to be caliphs because they wanted to take Muhammad's spot. And they were going around and killing even children who wouldn't go against their Christian beliefs. They were killing a lot of Christians. So we've got it kind of easy in dealing with that kind of stuff. But there's sometimes where government isn't doing what is right. Acts 5:29. Sometimes we must obey God rather than men. There's a number of other Bible narratives. What promise does God attach to this commandment? I've read it twice now. What promise is attached to this commandment? See who was listening.
That you enjoy a long life.
Right. You enjoy a long life. Your parents tell you things that they've learned so you don't have to go through the trouble of them. You know, like, don't touch the hot stove. You ever see a little kid that was told that go ahead and touch the hot stove instead? Boy, do they learn fast after that, don't they? They got their fingers with these lines on it. I saw one of my siblings do that. So the promise is there to live a long life. So we need to recognize other authorities in our life, and not only our parents. And I took you through one scenario of how that authority of being mother and father is passed on just when you get on the bus in the morning. Your bus driver becomes the authority, and then your homeroom teacher, if you change classes, then your next teacher, and then whoever's an authority overseeing the lunchroom or cafeteria, whatever you call it these days. And then you get back on the bus again, and the bus driver's there. And then you ask your mom if you can go to your mall with your friends. Who's an authority of you over there at the mall? Yeah. Yeah, the manager and the security that is provided there. You know, there's a lot of it's expected behavior, that you don't do crazy things. If you want to find out if there's behavior that's not acceptable, start doing it and see who shows up. And they have security people. So everybody understand the 4th commandment and its meaning. And personally, the 4th commandment is my favorite commandment. I really like it a lot. Because I got 6 kids. So, all right. Now, did I tell you that tomorrow I should have a grandchild? Did I tell you that that grandchild is a girl? And did I tell you that girl's name is Jane, which is an old name from when I was a kid? We read a book in 1st grade called Sally, Dick, and Jane. See Sally run. Run, Jane, run. See Dick walk down the street. No, it wasn't that. That's basically how the 1st grade grammar was, but it was Sally, Dick, and Jane. And then I talked to my daughter Sasha, who just went to the doctor today too, because she's going to have a baby in March. And we've had lots of girls, haven't we, Emma? And we haven't. How old is Nick? How old is Jake? 19. And Nick is what, 17? So we haven't had a girl added to our family in 17 years. Is that correct? And we're going to have a boy in March. And his name is Elias Brothers Big Boy. Isn't that what his name is? Elias Brother Big Boy? Do you all know what Big Boys is? I didn't realize how many people don't know what Big Boys is. Do they have Big Boys down here?
Not anymore.
But they had.
They had them like Florida and Bush, they changed their name,
Oh, okay.
but they used to.
Did anybody ever see the Elias Brothers Big Boy statue? He's a kind of a chunky guy with checkerboard, red and white overalls on, and then he holds a burger like this. You might have saw it on Storage Wars. Somebody found a bunch of Elias Brothers Big Boys. And you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So, because I wanted to name the next male grandchild James Robert, and I told Sasha I should be able to because it's been so long. And then she said Elias Hamilton, is it? Yeah, Hamilton. And I think James Robert is much more dignified. James Robert Powell. What do you think? But I guess it's not my choice. They get to exercise their authority of being mother and father by naming their child. So they get to do that. So that's coming very, very soon in March. But I'm excited tomorrow or soon after. We should have a little Jane running around. Well, not running around. Crying. Filling diapers and stuff. So. All right. Let's take a look at the fifth commandment. We're going to kind of just do a introduction to this. And I want to do an introduction to this. Jacob, can you read the fifth commandment in its meaning for us?
Yeah. The fifth commandment God gave life. You shall not murder. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not hurt or harm our neighbor in his body, but help and support him in every physical need.
Okay, very good. So you shall not murder. And there's a number of things that are brought up in here. And I think this is one of the good things about the New Catechism. I don't have a New Catechism with me. I don't care for the New Catechism. But even this catechism adds some things that weren't in the other ones. And in introducing the fifth commandment, we'll talk about these other things. Does everybody know what murder is? Do you know the difference between murdering and killing? What's the difference? Yeah. Did you say?
Murdering is like killing, like it's like a worse version of killing somebody. It's like knife intentionally, and killing is like all around. I don't know. Something like that.
No, that's not it. You got an idea?
Murdering is wanting to kill, killing somebody with the intention to kill someone.
Okay. And then what is just killing?
Killing is like self-defense.
Self-defense, or how about if you are serving the government by being in the military? Would you be murdering or would you be killing?
Killing.
You'd normally be killing if you went to war. Now, you could murder if you do something that's out of line, but for the most part, there's a distinction between killing and murdering. And I think this is some of the problems of, as I talk to people at PSTD, is to understand that when they are called on to kill someone, that they are exercising the sword for the kingdom of the left. It's not a fun thing. It's not an easy thing to do, but sometimes it's necessary. And sometimes governments make bad decisions to do that. So killing is something that might happen in self-defense, or also the example of being in the military. Murder is something you just do that's just outright wrong, wanting to kill somebody because you're angry at them. And I always watch, do any of you watch that dumb show? You're probably not going to want to raise your hand now. NCIS, it's fake, it's not real. I watch 48 Hours, which is all real. And what amazes me is that some people are surprised that when they deal with drugs, they're dealing with a lot of money and they carry guns, they're surprised that people get murdered. If you deal drugs, if you carry guns, there's a high probability what's going to happen to you. You're going to die. And that would be under murder. Now we have three other things that are listed here: abortion, euthanasia, and suicide. Let's take the second one. Euthanasia. Does anybody know what euthanasia is? You know what it is?
Yeah, it's like if you're older, it's like putting someone out of their misery.
Okay. Okay, I said euthanasia. So you think it's putting somebody out of their misery. But, well, let me explain to you what it is. If you go to Asia, they have young people there. And they call them youth. So the youth in Asia, do you see the difference? That was bad. Actually, you know where I got that from? I was in class at Michigan Christian College, and the professor asked what euthanasia was. And there was a student there that said, it's all about the youth who live in Asia. Actually, it was serious as all get. Now, what was interesting about that person is we had a train track right by the campus, and the train track, a train came through, and the person stood up and said, "A tornado is coming," and then gets down on her knees under her seat and covers her head. This is the same person that said euthanasia, because they thought the train was a tornado. They never had heard a tornado in their life, but they heard that they sound like trains. And so it was the same person. So euthanasia is correct in what you were saying. It's described as mercy killing. Well, they're going to die, so I'm going to treat them like a dog, and we'll put them out of their misery. Well, what's the difference between an animal and a person? What do people have that animals don't have? Yes. Right, they have a soul. And who died for that soul? Jesus, right. So there's a distinct difference here in the way we treat people. And how do we make decisions at end of life? When people are getting ill and they're older, you have to sometimes make how you're going to treat. And there's two questions I always remind people of that they need to think about. And you may have to think about that one day as your folks get old. You say the doctors offer you a treatment, and you need to ask this question: am I extending their death, or am I extending their life? Now, it's a hard question to answer, but you need to ask all kinds of questions of the doctors, the nurses, anybody that's involved, to see if you can answer that question adequately and make a decision that you might find out is wrong later on, but you could do it in good conscience with the information you have. Am I extending this person's death with this treatment, or am I extending their life? Sometimes it's 50-50. Sometimes they don't know. We had a relative a couple of years ago who they didn't think would make it through the surgery, but they put that person through the surgery, and they're still alive today. And sometimes it's questionable. But am I extending death, or am I extending life? So if you see there's a treatment that you're going to deny because all it's going to do is extend death, then here's the second thing you do. You care, but you don't kill. You care, but you don't kill. Now, the naive thing that happens out there is when people put their loved ones under hospice care. Does anybody know what hospice care is? You know what it is?
Yeah, it's like when a person gets to a certain point, they're going to die, and they're in hospice care.
Right. Yeah, they have to be evaluated, and if it looks like they're going to die, they'll put them under hospice care, and hospice provides a number of different things. But not all hospices are the same. There are some hospices that will offer drugs that will accelerate death. So it's your job to make sure you ask the proper questions. Or, for example, my wife's grandfather was sitting down with hospice when I walked in, and he chose no code. You know what no code means? That if anything happens to you, they're not going to try to save you. Okay? So I asked him, I said, Pops, I heard you said no code. I said, you know how you choke on meat sometimes? Because you lean over when you eat? I says, if you're choking on a piece of meat, do you want somebody to save you? He goes, yeah. I said, well, the decision that you just told her, you will not be saved from that. There will be no Heimlich maneuver done if she is here. And I said to her, I said to the nurse, I said, did you explain that to him? She said, no. I said, why? A lot of people just go ahead and make decisions with hospice that they're not educated about. So when we're making those end-of-life decisions, first, am I extending life or am I extending death? Secondly, if I am extending death and choose not to use a treatment, I need to care for my loved one but not kill them. Now, there's some things that are iffy, like a feeding tube. Sometimes you can give a feeding tube to someone and they won't starve to death. And my wife can tell you, she's worked in the nursing homes, assisted living for years, and she says there's nothing worse than watching somebody starve to death. However, there's sometimes when you give people a feeding tube that their system isn't working, and you know what'll happen? They'll just drown in their own fluid because they can't pass and properly digest the food. So sometimes you have to, when you come down to these questions of end-of-life issues, you have to really be knowledgeable, and you really have to ask a lot of questions of the doctors. And it's a difficult thing dealing with that. I remember once I was dealing with a doctor at a hospital nearby, and he always pressured the families into make a decision about end-of-life issues with their loved ones. So one day I took him aside and I said, let's go down the hall. I said, why do you come in and yell at families and say, you need to make a decision now? And I said, you know, this is a very difficult question, and I went through some of the stuff I talked about with you. And, you know, he didn't do that after that. One of the members that used to be here worked for him, and she come up to me and says, thank you for talking to the doctor I work for. And I was shocked. And he actually started going the other way, where he actually took time to realize what was going on, and that sometimes we make decisions that will kill. Sometimes we make decisions that will give life. Or sometimes we make decisions that will extend death rather than extend life. So those things need to be carefully thought through. So euthanasia is not about the euthanasia, but it's about what's sometimes called mercy killing. Now, suicide. Now, suicide is a very difficult thing. Suicide levels, they say, are rising now because of COVID. What is suicide? What is suicide? Emma? Yeah, when you kill yourself. Now, I happen to be a suicide assessment counselor. I've been doing suicide assessment counseling since 1988. And I've had 64 people that I've had to deal with who were suicidal. And thank God, 64 people that I dealt with that were suicidal did not commit suicide. It's a very difficult thing to do, counseling people who are suicidal. I don't like doing it. I'm very good at it because I've done it for a long time, and I was taught very well by one of my professors at Michigan Christian College. What's unique about suicide is that women treat suicide differently than men. Out of the 64 people that I've talked out of suicide, only 6 of them were men. And you know why? Women, when they're suicidal, will leave a way out. They'll talk to people about it. Men, when they're suicidal, will not talk to anybody about it. They'll just go and do it. My nephew committed suicide a little over a year ago, and everybody thought everything was okay. And so suicide is one of those things that you should not do, but we've also learned that people are suicidal for different reasons. My professor who taught me how to do suicide assessments describes suicide as this: the ultimate cry for help. the ultimate cry for help. You don't know what to do anymore, and you can't cope with anything, and it's just a cry for help, and then sometimes it gets followed through, and people die. So when you get in those situations, or you know people in those situations, it's important to get them help. Don't try to just be nice and not say anything. If you know somebody who's suicidal, make sure you contact an adult or an authority to look into it. When I am introduced to someone who's suicidal, I do what's called a suicide assessment. And it's a series of questions to figure out how serious they are about it. And when you talk about suicide with people who are suicidal, it doesn't drive them to commit suicide. When you don't talk to people or tell people about people who are suicide, a lot of times they'll go ahead and do it. So it's important for you, if you or anybody else that you know is talking that way, that you get somebody to assess their situation. So the ultimate cry for help, I think, is an excellent way of explaining it. It's taking your own life. And what's the other one we have? Abortion. Abortion, we got 2 minutes. We say a lot of things about abortion. What do we understand about abortion as Christians? As soon as that child is conceived, it is a gift of God. Now, there are questions sometimes about mothers who are in danger of their own lives, and those questions need to be answered by them. But in most cases, people just get abortions because they got pregnant, because they were doing things they shouldn't have been doing in the first place. And that pregnancy led to an unwanted pregnancy, and the answer for it was to have an abortion. One of the big things I deal with in my ministry are women who got abortions who have guilt later on. And so abortion is a very, very serious thing that unfortunately some people look and cheer abortion on. I've heard it during this election cycle. Abortion is wrong. It's killing a little baby, and we need to keep that in line. Okay, now we have run out of time. We'll look at "You Shall Not Murder" in more detail. But let's turn to our page. What did I say? 32, is it? 33. Luther's Evening Prayer. And let's join together in Luther's Evening Prayer. I thank you, my heavenly Father, through Jesus Christ, your dear Son, that you have graciously kept me this day, and I pray that you would forgive me all my sins where I've done wrong, and graciously keep me this night. For into your hands I commend myself, my body and soul, and all things. Let your holy angel be with me, that the evil foe may have no power over me. Amen.